All right, you're live. According to that.
Guess that means we should go ahead and do the intro then, huh?
Let's do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the football podcast about the conference currently referred to as the Atlantic Coast Conference. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, it is Friday afternoon, 3:30 on the East Coast, September 1st. Georgia Tech, Louisville kickoff in about 4 hours. I got ribs on the smoker. I got some wings I'm ready to grill up here in a little bit to get ready for the game for sure. Mike, what brings us to the podcast here today? Why are we doing an emergency pod?
We're doing an emergency pod because Cal, Stanford, and SMU are joining the ACC effective next year.
Oh, is that all? That's it? That's just a little bit of realignment on the second day of the season?
Welcome to the All Coast Conference.
Gosh. Yeah, I woke up to that text this morning at, I think it was like 7 a.m. Like, yep, they voted, they approved, and we're doing this. It's like, really?
Welcome. Here we are.
How we feeling about that, Mike?
The best time for the ACC to get involved with conference realignment was about a year ago, when, especially if they were going to add West Coast schools, Pac-12 schools. Best time would have been a year ago when USC and UCLA decided they were going to go to the Big Ten. Joey, the second best time is right now.
No time like the present, I guess.
Second best time's right now. I think.
All right. You want to get nuts? Come on. Let's get nuts.
Nuts
Yep.
we shall get.
Yeah. I think we've made it pretty clear where we stand on all this conference realignment stuff. We hate it. It's not great. It's a good time to crack that open. I'm not a huge fan of any of this, but with the way things are trending and the way things are going, this is something that just simply needed to be done. SMU, I think, is a really attractive. We're just talking like strictly like football teams, right? Like the football editions. SMU is an intriguing one. They run themselves like a Power Five. They're pretty much totally self-sufficient. They're self-funded if they need to be. Obviously, they're in their own conference right now, but if they needed to be independent, they could function that way. They would be fine. They have a lot of money flowing into that football program. I've mentioned this on this podcast before, Joey. Like, nobody needs to worry about SMU in regards to conference realignment. They would be fine. They're now joining the ACC, and I think they're a pretty intriguing football member. They're not really taking any money from this whole ACC venture as far as like TV money, media rights money for, I think, 7 or 8 years. I'm not sure what that ended up being today. It's going to be a while before they benefit from like the actual television network portion of being a part of the ACC. And that's because they're in position to do so.
I saw somewhere that they stated, or the theory on their end was, well, but some of the money that they will be entitled to, basically, they would be making about the same amount as they would if they just stayed in the AAC. So it's net neutral money-wise for them over the next several years, but it does provide the certainty or the security of being in what we currently refer to as power conferences.
Right.
As opposed to sticking around in what the whatever the AAC is these days.
Right. So I like the SMU edition. I think Cal and Stanford are obviously a draw for the ACC because of their academic prowess, right? And they fit in that regard to a conference that has a lot of very good academic institutions. So the presidents were the ones who voted on this, and it's pretty easy to see why Stanford and Cal made it into the ACC rather than maybe Washington State and Oregon State. They're just different academic profiles, right? So none of this makes sense from a geographical standpoint. None of it makes sense from a student-athlete standpoint. And none of this realignment stuff has made sense in those regards, right? So it's a waste of time to talk about that at this point. It just is, right? We can discuss how it screws a student-athlete and all that stuff. Like, all those points are well taken, but with the way things are trending, there's nothing any of us can do about it. So I think if you're in the ACC's shoes, like, this move makes a lot of sense, and it adds some money to the conference. It's better than doing nothing. I just think this is something that had to be done, and we can talk about the grant of rights, we can talk about the TV money, we can talk about the revenue distribution, which I still think is an issue. I don't think that's been solved today by any stretch, but I think this is something that needed to be done because the question I posed on Twitter earlier was, would you rather be the Big 12 or would you rather be the Pac 12? And I think adding these 3 schools today puts the ACC in better position to be the Big 12 rather than a conference that has totally dissolved and would force Joey and I to do something other than podcast about it, right? So that's, I think, what the ACC did today. It stabilized itself to a degree in the event that some of the more prominent schools like Florida State and Clemson leave it, right? Which still seems like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Well, it's a point worth bringing up. Is you mentioned that all the presidents voted on this morning.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the presidents voted for this morning. It has been pretty. It has not been very subtle. The way that I think Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson was probably the third one that have put statements out and publicly stated, we did not vote for this. This is not our thing. This is like some of this, I think, bothers me. We've gone through for a while how it's all about money. It's not about, matchups and the health of the sport and that kind of thing. But there's another aspect of this that bugs me, that this wasn't even all about money. None of this is about the football part. Some of this seems like it was the other 12 schools in the conference. I won't say staging a coup. It's not quite like that, but basically buying themselves some insurance, or it's like setting up a voting block or something for later when Clemson, Florida State, others try to leave the league. So this is like positioning, jockeying for the sake of what's going to happen in the future. And again, when it's not at all about the football and it's not even all about the money, I mean, the whole thing, it's gross and it bothers me to no end.
Yeah, NC State was the one school that flipped. Didn't have to be a unanimous vote, but the ACC needed at least 12 votes. NC State flipped. NC State was originally going to vote against it. They decided that whatever proposal they came up with this morning in this meeting was good enough for them to vote yes on allowing Cal, Stanford, and SMU in. So Florida State voted against it. Clemson voted against it. North Carolina voted against it. Those are probably the first 3 schools to leave anyway. So that's kind of where you're at here.
By the way, totally separate discussion for another day, but something that should probably be pointed out in this whole thing. The ACC got 12 out of 15 votes for this. And if you'll notice, if you go to the ESPN standings page, you'll probably only find 14 teams in the ACC. We can talk about one day the fact that Notre Dame also has a full voting share in how this all goes.
Makes total sense, right?
Yeah. Kind of beside the point for today, but just worth bringing up. What are we doing here?
Yeah. Notre Dame forced its hand in getting Cal and Stanford in particular into the ACC, which, to be honest with you, if Notre Dame was ever forced to join a conference or was in a position where they needed to join a conference, say the NBC TV money went away, which is not going away anytime soon. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that NBC TV money went away. There's another conference that I think Notre Dame is going to join far before they join the ACC.
That now has some NBC money anyways?
Mm-hmm. That would be the one.
Mm-hmm.
The Big Ten.
Seems that way.
The Big Ten.
Seems that way.
I mean, who did Notre Dame play before they were forced to play 5 ACC schools every year? They played Michigan. They played Michigan State. They played Purdue.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, guys.
Regional programs. Imagine that.
That's back when college football had regionality. Wow. What a novel concept that is.
Well, back in my day, which, was 5 years ago, it really wasn't that long ago. But, Mike, I will say this as a Georgia Tech grad, but as somebody who lives in Houston, I will say that the positive here is that now I'm going to get a chance to see my team and potentially others play with just a short drive away when they go visit SMU in Dallas. So that will be nice. Probably cuts the drive to the nearest ACC game, just like a home stadium, in about half. I think the closest I would guess was probably Tallahassee, which is probably about an 8-hour drive for us, but Dallas is only 4, so that's a good thing, I guess.
I guess. I mean,
we're trying to find the positives here.
I am really struggling to find those. Did you see the thing about the I saw part of the, I don't remember who it was, Thamel or Nicole Auerbach, somebody said that these teams might be getting, Stanford and Cal in particular for the Olympic sports might be getting together in Dallas,
Yeah, why
playing
not?
some of the ACC schools because Dallas has a big hub and it's not as far. Like, oh, good. Now we're thinking about the student athlete. Cool.
I think some of the maybe not as much the Big 12, but certainly this ACC Western branch and the Big 10 Western branch. I started thinking in the last few days, I wonder if we're going to get to a point where this is just so over the top ridiculous trying to make people travel back and forth, and especially all the, again, the non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports, that kind of thing. At what point do we all kind of look at each other and say, you know what, maybe we just do all this for football, and for all the non-rev sports, just go back to what we were doing. And, we don't need our swimming teams going cross country. We don't need the tennis team playing in Berkeley on a Wednesday. Like, let's just get everybody, we'll play football, do it this way, because clearly that's the money. That's the, what really drives all of this stuff. So we can do the football thing. And that's probably would coincide with like a breakaway from the NCAA or, something like that.
I was going to say.
But that's something I've wondered about, is how long does this last? I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, the breakaway from the NCAA thing, because I think that's where we're headed for football. But that doesn't mean all the other sports have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think that there's anything signifying that needs to be the case, especially for like the Olympic sports.
Right.
Because the way I look at it, what is really in this for them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the football programs bring in more money, which means more money for the athletic departments, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that money is just going to go to the football programs of the respective schools. It's not going to be spread across the board. All athletics programs, I'm sure, would be a beneficiary to a small degree. But you're telling me that these football programs, especially the ones that want to keep up and play in big time bowl games and try to have playoff aspirations, national championship aspirations, you're telling me that they're going to take that money that they're getting from their new conference or what have you, and they're going to distribute that to a volleyball program? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Shout out, by the way, to Volusia's Orange in the comments right now as we stream live. A faithful listener has been with us for a while, making some points. I mean, as a Clemson fan, I think, again, I would imagine Clemson, Florida State, UNC, their administrations, their fan bases, not happy about this. If it's all up to Volusia's Orange, Clemson's out of the ACC yesterday. We'll see what the actual timeline ends up looking like. But he did promise us that he will continue listening after the Clemson leaves the conference. So assuming that there is still a conference to podcast about, we appreciate your continued listenership.
Yes, for sure. Definitely. I echo everything Joey just mentioned. And, Volusia's Orange will be able to listen to us preview games such as the one taking place tonight, Joey. I'm not talking about Georgia Tech, Louisville. I'm talking about Stanford, Hawaii at 11 p.m. CBS Sports Network. We're going to be talking about that in a conference context here. Sooner rather than later, Hawaii will be part of the ACC.
That's right. So, yeah, I will say, I guess, I mean, we can mention this as part of this deal. Again, it sounds like, and again, it's only been a few hours since this has all been kind of started trickling out. It seems like, though, Stanford, Cal, SMU taking varying levels of either pay cuts or no payouts at all to join the league, which means that then there's more money out there and available for the other programs.
Mm-hmm.
Because by adding to the league, ESPN now contractually obligated to pay additional money to the league every year,
right?
In media rights. So figure we'd call that out. So that is, again, kind of helps some of the current teams in the ACC. Now, how much of that goes into just the normal annual payout versus how much of that is, again, going into this, what was the incentive pool?
Success-based metrics. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Again, who's to say? Can't really, don't know. But again, there's, I guess, a little bit of benefit to some teams in the ACC from this, at least for the time being.
Yeah. Look, two things here. Number one, because of the ACC ACC and ESPN, their TV network contract, $70 million is going to be coming into the ACC in additional revenue on a pro rata basis immediately. I mean, it happens immediately based on stipulations in the current TV contract. People say, I've seen this today on social media. This has really annoyed me, right? 70 million is not that much. Totally agree. 70 million is not enough to entice Clemson. It's not enough to entice Florida State into staying necessarily. But when I put something on social media and people respond to me saying each school is going to get like $4 million and that's it, that's just incorrect. This is going to be a success-based initiative. They're going to try to appease, right, Florida State, Clemson, UNC, and that could anger some fan bases in the ACC, and rightfully so, right? Because I think some fan bases could be seeing it as, oh, you're bending at the knee at some of the bigger football brands that might just be leaving the ACC anyway. Yep, that's true, but they haven't left the ACC yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you like it or not, those big brands are big brands for a reason. They're important to the conference for a reason. You'd rather have them than not, right?
Yeah.
So you take the $70 million, and for the most part, that's going to go in this performance-based pool. And if Florida State, who seems to think they're, a college football playoff contender this year, if they think that if they can put the money where their mouth is, right? They go out on the field, they play really good football this year, they're going to be a participant in that monetary pool. They're going to get more of it for being really good on the field. Clemson really stands to benefit from this because Clemson's a school that even at their worst has been a 10-win program, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Florida State, where they've had these peaks and valleys where they won a national championship a decade ago, now they think they can get back to something like that this year. That's great, but you got to kind of keep it up here, right? You got to keep yourself as one of the top programs in the ACC. I don't think this is something that is really going to benefit, these top schools in the long term, but in the interim, until this big time TV money kicks in with the Big Ten and the SEC, I think it's enough to appease schools like Florida State and Clemson, which, let's face it, this isn't going to be as big of a deal. This booming TV network money isn't going to be as big of a deal to Florida State and Clemson for a few years anyway. So until they plot their next move, maybe they'll say, you know what? This whole deal in the ACC for now isn't that bad. We already know that Florida State's going to be in the ACC in 2024. This past August 15th, a couple weeks back, was the deadline for Florida State to leave the ACC or to inform the ACC formally that they would be departing for the 2024 season. That deadline came and went. They're still a member of the ACC. They didn't formally put in their paperwork to leave, despite all of that crazy talk and that board meeting that went viral. They're still a member of the league through at least next season. They have until next August 15th to declare that they're going to be leaving for 2025. So this is all still probably a couple years away for Florida State and Clemson. And then you take into the fact that the grant of rights is still really solid. We're not naive, though. You can break the grant of rights if you're able to pony up enough money, but it will be an unprecedented amount of money for schools like Clemson and Florida State to pony up, the likes that we haven't really seen across college football yet. That's why everybody's making the Saudi Knowles jokes on Twitter, right? That they're going to need Saudi money to break the grant of rights.
A little bit of venture capital.
It's going to be an exorbitant exit fee for them to leave, right? So this is not an easy thing for Florida State to do. If it was, they would have left already.
Yeah. And that's the part that I don't get is, what we got to do, we got to put the money here to appease Florida State and Clemson. It's like, you do not have to appease Florida State and Clemson. Like, this isn't like a contract year situation. It's not even like the contract's up next year, or you're trying to extend a 3-year window out to 5 years or anything. I mean, this is a long-term thing. We got another decade of this. I mean, everyone kind of agrees that the money is pretty prohibitive for at least half a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, there's no urgency. You really don't have to be doing this to appease those members because, okay, appease them. They're going to do the same thing anyway. They're going to leave one day. Like,
right.
Just come to terms with that. That's okay. We can accept that. And I don't understand what the point is or what the gain is to do that, other than, again, maybe for the sake of getting votes on something or other. I don't know.
Well, the ACC's argument, too, is going to be like, well, we're not really appeasing Florida State and Clemson. We're appeasing the schools who play really good football. That's going to be their argument. So, okay, Wake Forest.
Yeah.
Come on down, right?
Yep.
I would say, hey, NC State, come on down, but I just watched them struggle for 4 quarters against UConn last night. So,
yeah,
we'll talk about that on the recap. But
yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. But anyway, for schools like Florida State and Clemson, who have the recruiting prowess and they're trying to play big boy football, Miami, too, who hasn't kicked off yet, so I can't make too many jokes about them yet, would be another school.
Mike, I do have bad news for you. Something that you should be aware of as the conference adds these 3 teams. Every single one of them has a winning record over your Hokies all time. So I think you should know that is that Virginia Tech now falling down down a couple rungs down the ladder, if you will, because Stanford all time 1-0 against Virginia Tech.
Orange
Cal
Bowl.
is
Yes.
1-0 against Virginia Tech.
Aaron Rodgers bowl game. Continue.
And SMU is 2-1 against Virginia Tech.
I can't speak to SMU's record against Virginia Tech, but I can speak to the Aaron Rodgers Insight Bowl that Virginia Tech lost, and I can also speak to the Andrew Luck-led Stanford Cardinal that beat Virginia Tech in the Orange Bowl in 2010.
Yeah.
So I can speak to those. I think the Insight Bowl was 2004, 6, something like that.
Sure.
In that time frame, right, Scott? Somewhere in there. It's been a while.
Probably about the last time there was an
Rodgers
Insight Bowl.
Rodgers was drafted in 05, so it has to be 04, I think.
It was 04. It was 04. I was right the first time.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, these teams with illustrious histories with the ACC. So look forward to Virginia Tech trying to claw their way back in. By the way, with SMU, Virginia Tech got one over on them in 1972, but is now on a 2-game losing streak, having lost in 73 and 74.
I was going to say dating back to when. I was curious when the last time they played was.
So we'll see if they can claw their way back into that rivalry and even the score here at some point in the next few
Nothing
years.
counts before Frank Beamer. Nothing counts. Nothing
I was
counts.
going to say if the matchup is as old as some of our parents, I think we can probably go ahead and kind of throw it out the window.
Stanford and Cal, by the way, with winning records all time against the ACC in general. Stanford 11-10 all time against ACC competition, and Cal 13-11-1. So long, illustrious histories with ACC schools playing Stanford and Cal. SMU slightly less fortunate, 16-17-2. That is by far the most matchups of these three that they've ever had with ACC programs. So that's fun.
The one thing I want to add here, and I think it's really important for our podcast, is that I think we have a couple new candidates, at least 2, maybe 3, depending on the year for SMU, candidates to potentially be the bar in the ACC.
I mean, yeah, I would put SMU there before I would put Cal or Stanford with what we've seen from them the last couple of years.
Yes, agree.
For what it's worth, little live podcast thing, I'd be interested in Hawaii catching 4 points, I think, at home against Stanford tonight. So if you're of that persuasion, you might want to join me on that one. So I do want to call attention to this comment we got from Volusia's Orange. He says, I always wanted to stay in the ACC, but just don't see the path forward if we're meant to continue to be competitive financially with other schools nationally. I hear that sentiment a lot, and I've mentioned this before. What is the money for? What's the money for? You've got less money than SEC teams and Big Ten teams right now, and you've won the conference almost every year for the last decade.
2 titles,
national titles. What's
to 3.
the problem? What is the money going to solve? What's the problem? What can't you do if you don't have more money? That's my question. That's my issue.
Who is following up in the comments and saying he cannot stomach falling behind South Carolina in any way, shape, or form. Maybe that's it.
That sentiment I can live with.
I can understand that
because I hate my rival.
Right. That would be fair. I will say this, right? The SEC and Big Ten money is unprecedented. Unprecedented. It's going to go into facility improvement, added infrastructure, more coaches, more support staff, more recruiting staff. The recruiting staff piece and the whole, staffing infrastructure piece, in my opinion, some people are going to disagree with this because they're going to say, oh, facilities matter, all that stuff. I agree. All that stuff matters. What's most important is that you have people out there who could go recruit. You have these huge staffs. That's what's most important. Can your staff recruit? If the answer is yes, how many people are there on that staff that can recruit?
Mike, did you watch the Utah-Florida game last night?
Unfortunately.
Because I think my favorite comment was, I think it was Bud Elliott who pointed out, it doesn't matter if you can hire 200 dudes in polos and khakis if you don't know how to organize them.
I agree.
Florida with the khaki pants army that Clemson runs out there and everybody else, they've got 2 guys on special teams wearing the same number. They've got 8 guys out on a field goal block. More people, okay, maybe, but that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't necessarily get you anything.
Look, Napier, I'll be the first one to say it. Napier's got a lot of Justin Fuente in him, right? There are a lot of similarities. You got guys who can't line up. You have, staff that, can't get, you mentioned it yourself, the players can't get organized. They're having trouble lining it. They had 2 guys with the same number get in last night on a special teams play. That was an obvious issue. Utah got a first down, later scored on that drive. It was a mess. Florida was a disaster last night. Graham Mertz actually threw for a career high, and they still got dogged. I'll put it nicely.
It's a family show, Mike.
Yeah. Put it nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky, nice of you to join us from the Hokie Hangover himself.
My co-host from my Virginia Tech podcast is joined in the comments. Adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU is just a Band-Aid. Maybe it keeps the ACC from dissolving, but the best case scenario is still trying to stay on par with the Big 12. That's Ricky. Sure. I don't know if you just joined us. We mentioned that a few minutes ago. That's kind of right on the money. Like, this is not something that propels the ACC to a Big 10 or SEC level. What this does is this keeps you afloat when some of the bigger brands leave. It's going to be a slower dissolution of the conference, right? Like, you're not going to have the schools like Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, UVA, who else? Wake Forest, Duke. Like, they're not going to be scrambling, finding other conferences to go to when Clemson and Florida State leave, right? Some of those schools are going to try to be more proactive and finding new places to go. It'll be a little bit of a slower burn than sorry, I'm laughing at the comment from Ricky. Than the Pac-12, which is like, just okay, a few of our schools left. Oh no, Colorado left. The entire conference needs to leave now. That's pretty much what happened after USC and UCLA. It was like, who's the next shoe to drop? Oh, okay, it's Colorado. Now we all have to leave for some reason. I just think it's going to be harder to do that when you just have simply more numbers, right? There's more schools. And look, if Florida State finds a way to break the grant of rights and, they come up with whatever it is, hundreds of millions of dollars, more power to them. How many schools in the ACC are going to be able to pay the exit fee that Florida State is going to try to pay? Not a ton. The grant of rights is pretty good. Mm-hmm. That's not the issue. It's the television contract that's the issue.
Do you guys have thoughts on maybe adding more than just these teams? Or is it only these teams because 2 are dying and 1 has oil money?
I mean, first of all, I think it's like a pretty non-starter if we're not talking about Notre Dame or, a couple of those teams, and they're not willing to give up some of the concessions that Stanford, Cal, and SMU agreed to of, basically just giving away their shares for the rest of the league, right? I think that's the first thing you would have to even consider it.
Okay. So I was thinking, I know I've been texting you guys this for the past few weeks when this talk's been going on. So some people might not agree with this take, but Appalachian State, why not?
Probably because UNC and NC State would say no.
But we have Wake.
Yeah, I mean, from a competitive standpoint and from a rivalry and regionality standpoint, yeah, for sure. You could consider actually, like, does Appalachian State want to leave the Sun Belt? Because it seems like a lot of these Sun Belt teams, they're okay not having a lot of money if it means they get to play their rivals regularly and kind of keep that whole thing going, right? Like they know where they are and they know what they appreciate about this whole thing, and they're just kind of committed to that. I don't think anyone's really chasing money out of the Sun Belt that I've seen.
That's true. And Adam's got a good point in the comments. He said 18, I'm assuming that's the number of schools, is fine. Tulane and West Virginia. So is West Virginia really going to up and leave the Big 12, though? Or, yeah, the Big 12?
So here's the thing. Between the Big 12 and the ACC, you're in better position right now if you're in the Big 12. Number one, the TV contract's better. Number two, the TV contract ends earlier than the ACC's. Mm-hmm. 5 years earlier, right? Yeah. So if you're in the Big 12, you got no reason to jump to the ACC, right? So West Virginia would be a natural fit, I think, to join the ACC just from a sheer athletic standpoint. You can make the arguments about the academic side, whatever, but from an athletic standpoint, they would be a natural fit. The problem is the Big 12's TV contract ends 5 years before the ACC's does. So the Big 12, depending on the state of the conference, none of us can predict what the conference is going to look like, 7-8 years from now, but they're in position to pony up and get the next big television contract. We can argue if there's a TV bubble, if these executives won't want to pay for the college football inventory the way they want to pay for it now. I think all of those arguments have merit. But let's say it's just continuing down the same path it is right now. The Big 12's in better position to cash in. It'll be 5 more years before the ACC grant of rights expires, right? The grant of rights and the TV network go hand in hand. This is a really bad position for the ACC to be in. It's not a bad position for the Big 12 to be in because, number one, their TV contract right now is better. Number two, I think the state of the conference right now, if you're looking just sheer football programs, I think the ACC is in a better spot than the Big 12. I think it's just as deep of a conference. I think they have, obviously, Florida State and Clemson. I'd put against the top 2 teams in the Big 12, who I guess right now are who? TCU, just made a national championship appearance, but that could be a one-hit wonder. It's more like probably Oklahoma, who's going to leave, and then Texas, who's going to leave.
Texas is leaving, yeah.
So after that, it's Oklahoma State and TCU. Like, who are the top 2 teams in the Big 12? So
would UNC be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the Big 12? Probably. I mean, in a conference that does nothing but score a ton of points, you're telling me UNC can't compete there? Yeah, they're specifically designed to compete there.
Right. So it's a mess.
I'm with you. That's the other thought that I've had is kind of going at it from the old Big East angle. Is you mentioned the West Virginia thing. Cincinnati is now a Big 12 team, but if you can get West Virginia and Cincinnati, I don't think you're getting Rutgers or Maryland unless one of those 2 gets jettisoned from the Big 10, which sounds heinous, but is it? Guess we'll find out. If you again trying to maintain regionality and rivalries and all that stuff where you can, I think would be worth exploring. Yeah, Tulane has been suggested by a couple folks. I think that's a valid suggestion as well. So something to consider, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
We'll see what happens. I don't think any of this is really. This is more. I mean, for folks arguing that today's news is a net negative for the ACC, I just disagree. I think at worst, this is a neutral move. At best, I think there's a marginal benefit for the ACC. I don't think standing pat right now is something that can be done. Like, ask the the Pac-12 how that went.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't stand pat at this point. And like I mentioned earlier, the best time for the ACC to engage in conference realignment was a year ago. The next best time is right now. So
sure,
I don't love the fact that the ACC sat on the sidelines during the initial wave of the realignment. We knew that USC and UCLA were bolting for the Big Ten. We also know that the ACC engaged with schools in the Pac-12, but fact of the matter is they just didn't close any deals with some of the better programs left in the Pac-12, and now you're left kind of fending for what's left, which, from a football standpoint, I honestly think you'd rather have Oregon State and Washington State. So they took the 2 better academic brands instead of the 2 better football brands, which is fine. But this is something that, a position you put yourself in when you sit around and you wait and you let other conferences make the first move and you're reactive instead of proactive. What I will say is, for everything that's going on right now, if you have the option to add these teams, even though it's late, even though it's probably not your first, the first choices, I think you just have to make the move, right?
Yep.
So I'm okay with this today. I think it's at worst a neutral move. At best, gives the ACC marginal benefit. That's my final take on it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I have one last question. How soon till the next change? Prediction. How soon do you think?
Next summer.
Yeah, I think it'll quiet down. I think it'll quiet down now, which is insane for me to say because we all know that it's like half a news cycle away from something else happening.
I'll say next summer for the ACC, but at some point something's going to happen with Wazoo and Oregon State too, because they're now the Lone Rangers left in the Pac-12, and who knows where they end up.
Yeah,
Mountain West or Independent, or who knows what they're going to do.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And these schools, Washington State and Oregon State, real quick before we wrap up, they stand to benefit from not joining another conference, because if you look at the bylaws, I learned this today. John Wilner from San Jose Mercury News wrote about this, and he's real tied into the Pac-12. He wrote that there is a way to interpret the bylaws where Washington State and Oregon State would actually make a lot more money if they just tried to poach teams from the Mountain West rather than go join the Mountain West. So that's something to keep an eye on, because there's the NCAA tournament units, there's college football playoff money that gets distributed. There's all this extra money that is just sitting there in the Pac-12 from the teams that left it. And if they don't join another conference, there's a way to interpret the bylaws where Oregon State and Washington State would keep that money.
Mm-hmm.
If they join another conference, what's left of all the Pac-12 assets gets distributed across the 12 teams that used to be in the Pac-12. So from a financial standpoint, it may benefit Washington State and Oregon State potentially to either be independent, which I don't think would happen, or try to reinvigorate the Pac-12, which has its own issues because they don't even have a media rights deal at this point.
I say, well, you just retain the brand basically, but that's, I guess, the way those contracts are written now.
Yeah.
Contracts can probably be broken and rewritten as soon as everyone else realizes this is not what we signed up for, but that's a discussion for a different day. So I expect something will happen there in the next 6-8 weeks, probably. We'll find out something. But if the ACC does something else, I think it's next summer at the earliest.
I think so too.
But I at this point, I feel like we're so far down the path that this is just going to keep going on until the sport restructures itself entirely or something. Like,
totally agree.
It's, I don't know what's going on here. So, Mike, I'm going to go work on the ribs, and I'm going to get ready to watch a football game between my favorite team and my other favorite team tonight. But I'm glad we got to get together here and talk about the conference expansion just continuing and now hitting the ACC for the first time in a few years. So enjoyed it. You want to get out of here and go watch some games?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. This is a live show we did Friday afternoon. We're going to do another live show Sunday night, a little Sunday night fever after the Florida State LSU game. We're going to do live shows Saturday nights throughout the fall. So keep it tuned here. Wherever you're watching this right now, on Twitter, on YouTube, anywhere. Obviously, the audio will be posted to the podcast feed. So go find it there as well. Go use promo code GOACC at section103.com for all sorts of wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. And I think that's all for the most part, Mike.
Yep.
At FTRS Joey, at Mike McDaniel SI, at BC Podcast ACC on Twitter for anything else that you might be looking for from us.
Yep.
All right. Well, for that guy, Mr. Mike McDaniel, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again very, very soon. Enjoy the games this weekend. And until next time, go Atlantic Coast Conference.